Hey, good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you, Kev Mo. Stand up and be strong. This is Michael James with Katie Hogan and Tom Clark, and we're here for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show at home. This is number 15 for the week of August 3rd, and we are so glad that you are going to be listening in. You can catch us on youtube.com/Heartland Media, this and many other editions. You can catch us on a rebroadcast on our regular time at WLUW's 88.7 or WLUW.org on Saturday morning at 9. And we are really happy to say that we are once again going to be rebroadcast on CAN TV. Stay tuned to your local listings for CAN TV, and you'll get to see us on that format. There's a lot of rough things that happened this week, but there's also some good things and some uplifting experiences. And we're going to start off with that. We're each going to give you a little bit of what we found to be a little bit special in our lives. Tom?
Well, we have painters around here, and we have Zoom sessions with yoga and piano lessons with the grandkid. It's been actually really busy, so we adjust to this being all together and at home. I think a lot of people are doing apartment repairs and stuff like that. The big thing overriding everything else is that as a household, we have to make a decision what happens with the grandson in schooling this fall, as many other parents and teachers and others are trying to figure out right now. And we just don't know what's going to happen, except for being given very short timelines to make decisions by the Chicago Public Schools without much information about what things are going to look like. So try to be upbeat, and through the grandson's eyes, we continue to explore the world, but we still have that hovering in the background. Constant reminder this virus is not under control yet. Katie?
Hi, Tom. That was an interesting bunch of stuff. I'll tell you, I had a really hard time finding something uplifting for this segment this week. I'm sorry, it's true. I am, not with a little youngster running around to keep me happily distracted. I don't have ducks in my backyard. I do have a nice garden here at the co-op that I've referred to before. Although this week I only feel guilty because I didn't help water it. I'm telling you, I'm admitting to being a little down in the dumps about the COVID situation at this point. When I did look and search hard, because no one that has a roof over her head and food in the refrigerator should be complaining at all. I am grateful for my reading group, which is almost 30 years old, and we started this week out talking about the book White Fragility, of course, which half the white people in America are reading right now, and if they aren't, they should be. So that is a positive thing, and we've actually met with each other on Zoom almost twice as much in the last few months, because what else is there to do? And we've been reading like gangbusters. So I love those gals, and I'm glad to be part of them. How about you, Michael? Did you have something positive to report?
I'm an optimistic kind of a dude, so I'm not easy to, it doesn't take a lot to make me kind of happy. But I got to say that I'm pretty blissed out. Yesterday, I drove out to O'Hare, and my daughter, Casey Blue James, who has been quarantined in her apartment in New York, in the Queens, which is heavy into the virus. And she's inside all the time except for her runs, including a half marathon. She came home. She came out of the airport. She had an extra layer of clothes. She had a big mask. She took all that stuff off, put it in the back of the car, got in the back. I put the rooftop thing open, the windows open. We blasted off from home. And we had a good dinner and a kind of a family reunion. She's going to be here for a good amount of time. She was working from home. She'll continue to work from home, and I'm really excited to have her here. That was the highlight of my week. There were some other good things, but later for that.
I don't blame you. That's a great highlight.
So let's take a deep dive into it. How about making America great again? Worst GNP in history. Way to go. Nice having a business manager in charge of things, don't you think? This is worse than the Great Depression, much less the last recession. And of course, unemployment didn't get extended on time. So we are really going into the end of summer very much uncertain about even what's happening with our economy, much less those unemployment checks.
I find that inability of the Republican Senate to do something for the American people one of the more damning things they've done out of the huge list that exists of what they've been irresponsible about all the entire time of this administration. Them not passing something that will give aid to the millions across the nation who are suffering is unconscionable. We're talking to each other on August 1st. By the time you guys see this, we'll find out whether or not people have taken to the streets on that particular issue, or whether they figured out that, we need to help. We need to get more help to folks.
Here's a good quote that we're going to read to you. At no point in my career or life have I felt our nation's value under greater threat and in more peril than at this moment, writes Alexander Vindman, the retiring lieutenant colonel. Quote, our national government during the past few years has been more reminiscent of the authoritarian regime my family fled more than 40 years ago than the country I have devoted my life to serving.
And for those of you who remember, this was the fellow who gave some pretty important testimony in the impeachment hearings, and the country he was referring to, I believe, is the Ukraine, right?
Right.
Yeah. Pretty moving.
How about some activist highlights for the week, Tom?
Well, meanwhile, as those unemployment checks run out, there's increasing pressure on tenants who are having more and more trouble making rent. More and more housing activists are taking action in New Orleans, several black landlords coming into housing court. Same thing happened in Kansas City. City of Chicago has extended the time that tenants have if landlords start eviction proceedings from, I believe it's from 30 to 90 days, which is a start, but the rent relief program that's been announced isn't enough to cover everyone who needs it. It's a very temporary fix, and of course, not much help from the federal government as the Senate continues to dicker over what kind of relief we might get for the so-called stimulus. It is encouraging to see activists being on top of this to try to bring some relief to tenants who are very hard-pressed. An even bigger problem looms around the corner with our post office, though.
Oh my gosh. I mean, what I read this week from Common Dreams, watchdog groups are getting together to demand a probe into voter suppression tactics used by this new postal chief, who just happens to be a major Trump supporter and donor, one Louis DeJoy. Folks in the Wisconsin Common Cause, who most recently had their own experience with trying to get their primary ballots. Some 2,600, as if I recall correctly, were unaccounted for in Wisconsin, that people actually cast write-in ballots and they disappeared or didn't make it on time, didn't make it back to the ballot box on time. Most people right now should be signing up for a mail-in ballot, and then for those who have no problem, they should fill it out and send it back in October, no later than the month before the election, to make sure that we've got enough ballots, banked before the shenanigans start. And the shenanigans will start a couple weeks before November 3rd. I mean, they're already starting when he says things like, maybe we should, postpone the election.
Well, what about that?
Well, he can't do it. All right. It's just, he can't do it. He's trying
undermining the, the election in a lot of ways. He's
say that
trying
again?
to undermine people's appreciation of whatever happens.
I think
He's trying to.
It's a squirrel story. He's trying to divert our attention from things like the GNP going down and higher unemployment rates and COVID spreading, uncontrollably. He has to think of something, and so I'll throw out this canard. it can't happen, but it can throw some fears into some people about whether this is going to be legit. And, it wasn't so long ago we had Gore versus Bush. So we'll see how it plays out this time. I hope we have better lawyers this time.
Well, tell us the one that you had this story about the president making a play for suburban voters.
You would have thought it was George Wallace running again, and he was to the right of Nixon, if you recall. So in a play for suburban voters, some of the most racist, segregationist kind of rhetoric came not out of somebody's other retweet, but his own mouth this week. And he's fear-mongering again, dividing rather than uniting. And I think it's a little bit too late to try to throw fair housing stuff out the window, but new regulations that came in during the Obama administration that required every community accepting federal funds to look at whether they had enough affordable housing. Didn't have to do anything about it. They just had to look at it and plan if there were deficiencies. Well, Trump threw that rule out this week because it was forcing suburbs to take that low-income housing next to your American dream. It's a canard. It's another way to stir up fear. It's a dangerous, dangerous despot in motion.
I think I've got a runner-up or
oh my gosh, you do?
Yes, or maybe something that could give you a run for your money on the head exploding front, and that was the article, an in-depth article by Catherine Abed of Vanity Fair, detailing Eban is her name, detailing the level of depravity of Jared Kushner, who was in charge of supposedly the response, put in charge by his father-in-law, because, it's again something he's really qualified to do. But in fact, he had put together a group of people almost as if they were going to make a leadership, a well thought out leaderly moment on the COVID response. And the people who took part in it are quoted in this article, chapter and verse. When he realized that COVID was really mostly in Democratic cities and mostly hurting people of color, all of a sudden the testing plan was abandoned because they thought it was politically advantageous to sit back and let the blue states eviscerate themselves. Unfortunately for him, the red states started eviscerating themselves since then. But watch this space, because by the time you see this, I'm hoping that there's a huge hue and cry for his resignation. And if not, then my head will explode again. But we're in strange times, folks. Strange times.
Yeah, his COVID plan really worked out well, didn't it?
Yeah.
Very strategic. Letting Charles Darwin take its course, I guess, or something. Well, another mind-exploding thing was the dilution of regs that we're hoping to try to prioritize already environmentally challenged areas of the country. And we will cover this more as we go forward. But I'm afraid our friends in the Southeast side who are already battling a lot of hot spots, and we don't mean COVID, but pollution spots, may have less and less recourse to the federal government because of the way the Trump administration diluted additional rules to try to protect those communities. Every week there seems to be another release of junk into the atmosphere because of regulations that we had started 20, 30 years ago being tossed by this administration. Watch out, folks.
Katie, I understand that you, some people have asked you to make donations to their campaigns.
Well, this is, we're recording at the end of the month, and it just blows my mind. I'm not a big donor, obviously. I don't have that kind of bucks, but I am consistent over the years. I have given my 5, 10, 15, 20 buck donations to always Democratic candidates, and and timed along, and some events like the Save the U.S. Post Office folks, or the folks who are fighting for redistricting things to happen. But this is the thing. I do not get angry at the too much at the requests because they don't keep track of how many times you've donated or how much. But I do think this year, pick a couple of races, people. It doesn't matter that you don't have any more money than I do. And most of you probably do, but for those who are at my income level, $20 makes a difference. A $20 check to Lauren Underwood right now, who we definitely want to see reelected from her district out west of us, the 14th district, will mean more than you imagine, because she can say that's one more donation, which means she can say, I have this many thousand individuals donating $40 or less to me, which means actually more these days than $10 million donations from the big guys. We are chipping away at the consciousness politically around money gathering and its adverse effect on the democracy. So I really encourage you to get your little toes in that game. Choose one of the Senate races, either against Mitch McConnell or the one in Iowa right next door to us, which is going to be a more easy flippable. But we should be supporting the things that we're talking about. Otherwise, what's the talk? You got to walk it. Anyway, that's my thing. Make a donation.
I promise I will make some donations of small change.
Small change, that's all. Doesn't matter.
No big bucks to top off anyone's wardrobe.
It's really important to pay attention to those down ballot initiatives, and we'll talk a little bit later about one that's on the top of our ballot coming up. But I want to return to this big decision that households have to be making very quickly in the next week or two about going back to school. It's something that's really affecting a lot of people beyond just where a kid's going to go to school this fall and how are they going to continue their education. The New York Times has a new piece of research out that shows what your likelihood of being in a classroom that has someone with an infection showing up. They looked at a typical school the size of 500 kids and looked at current infection rates county by county. And something like 80% of counties live in areas where at least one infected person could be expected to show up, which means that whole school will have to consider some kind of additional quarantine or other measures to keep everyone else safe. If you're in a pod of 10 students or smaller, it's much safer. There's just a lot of confusion over what's going to happen. And I think a lot of parents may end up being forced, even though that's not what they want, to have kids at home more often. And there are all sorts of other implications about how well can you learn from home, internet connections we've talked about before. It's really sort of a mess. And it's something that will end up affecting all of us, not just school-age kids and their parents.
How about a little rock and roll?
I think maybe it's definitely time for that.
Little rock and roll.
We want to acknowledge the decision that parents seemingly have to go through now, and we wish everyone luck in trying to decide the best way to get through it. A little bit of fun from Alice Cooper and the Muppets.
about a couple of public service announcements? I'm going to start off with one that's really important. You've heard a lot about the census. You probably have surmised that the Trump people do not want you to fill out your census. They've tried to keep immigrants from being included in the census, at least from being counted in how voting districts are set up. And it's real important that you fill out the census. Just go to your census survey. You'll find it online. It's important that you do it. It means more money will come into places that really need it, rather than them being cut short and diminished in their influence. And I know Katie has one too.
And of course, we'll also continue to remind you that the very first thing on the ballot this November is not president. It is an amendment to the Illinois Constitution, which will change the taxing structure from a flat tax to a graduated, or what some are calling fair tax. It is an amendment. It requires 60% of the vote across the state. Chicago will be a major piece of delivering that vote. We will not stop reminding you, but please let others know. And there's a lot of information about the Fair Tax campaign under voteyesforfairtax.org. Check it out. It'll tell you all the points that we'll continue to share with you. But the truth of the fair tax in Illinois is that about 90% of us will see no change at all. There will be many who will have a slight increase. There will be some who receive something that they didn't before. But 90% of us, there will be no change this first year. Anyway, thanks, Michael, for reminding us of that. Let's ask you about your favorite topic on these shows.
Well, we're going to do another little sports report, and really it's about sports intersecting with the virus. Baseball has balked in their opening with the COVID. The
That's a pun.
The Marlins had to cancel a number of games. The Cardinals had a game canceled. I'm not sure how long baseball will survive. On the basketball front, it seems like they're a little bit more together. You know, they're in this kind of bubble down in Disney World or Disneyland, the one in Florida. And they've got 20 some odd teams. I think it's 22. And the opening nights, the players, the coaches, the referees all kneeled. They have on their practice jerseys, it all says Black Lives Matters. On the court, it says Black Lives Matters. And each player, I watched the Milwaukee-Boston game last night, which Milwaukee won. They have their favorite expression on the back, whether it's Black Lives Matter, Justice Now, equality, educational reform. I mean, a whole diverse group of things are said, and I think the players got to choose how they wanted to do it. And on a sad note, we learned that the Kenyan runner Ben Jipko from Kenya has passed away. He was in the '68 Olympics. He ran at a blistering pace, and he didn't win the race, but he helped his teammate win the race over the American Jim Ryan. And we'll keep you posted on what's going on in the sports world as it comes up, because a lot of people like sports, and it's starting to be on TV, and we're getting more of it, whether it's in a positive way or not. We'll see. I know Katie was kind of concerned that some colleges were telling the students not to come back, but they wanted the football players back in a hurry, because like at the Southeast Conference, which has limited itself to 10 games, these are big money makers.
Yeah, I predict this will not come to a good end for the student athletes, their families, or the schools. But enough of bad news for this one.
We do have some, in this moment where some businesses have been allowed to reopen, I feel like we're returning to the walking neighborhood our home of Rogers Park is really designed for, as we see some of our favorite places either have survived and retooled to survive the pandemic or have begun to reopen. Jarvis Street won't have cars on weekends, so you can have outdoor restaurants and other kind of gathering going on. That might happen on Loyola Avenue soon. You have Twisted Tapas and Le Piano, both a little bit more upscale restaurants that have both reopened, and all sorts of safety measures. Restaurants in Howard that had to close or reopen, up and down Clark Street, some of our favorite spots, including ones that managed to stay open. JB's, Smack Dab, Honey Bear has opened up their parking lot and back for brunches on the weekends. I like some of not returning to normal, but returning to something better. If we have a walking neighborhood going as a result of some of these changes, and that's the way to keep our local businesses going and for us to invest in them as well, I'm all for it.
I want to include too Archie's over on Loyola, and they also are doing some music like they piano. And someone's going to talk a little bit about John Lewis and Obama's the words he gave at the funeral.
Well, we talked about John Lewis for the last couple of weeks, and he did have a very moving homegoing week, traveling from meaningful city to the next in his life, winding up in the Capitol and then winding up back in Atlanta. And Barack Obama gave a about 37-minute eulogy, which was way more than a eulogy. I would call it a call to action, which of course pissed off some people in Washington, D.C. It was notable, although not, that the leader of the free world couldn't even make it to the honoring John Lewis. I mean, it would have been totally hypocritical if he had. But there were three former presidents in the church, and Jimmy Carter sent his best. God love him. But the eloquence with which Barack talked about John Lewis's life of service, life and attitude towards even the people he was fighting to get past was just one of the better things that's happened in many, many weeks. A lot of people on social media were like breathing a sigh of relief to hear that kind of rhetoric and that kind of talking to us like we have a brain and a heart and a soul. And I thank you, Barack, for talking to us like that, because we do have all of the above.
In
the coming weeks, we're going to be bringing some other friends and colleagues and neighbors onto this show on a more regular basis. Next week, we have our dear friend and nationally renowned storyteller, Susan O'Halloran. And she'll talk about her move to Florida in the midst of this whole pandemic, as well as her ongoing work as an anti-racist trainer. We're really looking forward to having Susan back. Michael?
One more in memoriam would be the wonderful coach and human being, Lou Henson, who coached both at University of Illinois and New Mexico State, and our good friend and frequent visitor on the show, Russ Bradford, who worked with Henson at New Mexico State as a recruiter and a coach, wrote a very nice obituary in the Tribune this week. Lou Henson was really a nice guy. I met him in El Paso at Basketball in the Barrio. Russ wrote a nice piece, and he did good in the world. And speaking of doing good in the world, we want to thank you all for tuning in. We want to thank Susan Clark for her ongoing and getting better every week post-production work. We want to thank our fellow team members, Lynn Orman and James Porter. We want to encourage you all good in the world, because the world needs all the good that we do. All
power to the people.
We'll see you next week. We're going out with No Woman, No Cry, Monty Alexander and the Harlem Kinson.